I'm 84, and last August my grandson Marcus was visiting from Austin, Patricia's boy, 17 years old, all arms and strong opinions. And we were walking out to the garden one morning when he stopped at the porch steps and said, "Grandpa, how come you never use the rail?" I said, "Because I don't need to." He got quiet the way young people get when they don't know how to say what they're actually thinking. And then finally he said, "That's kind of impressive, actually." I've been around long enough to know that impressing a 17-year-old is not the highest bar a man can set for himself. But that moment stayed with me, not because of his surprise, because of mine. I hadn't thought about those porch steps in 20 years. I just walked up them. That's what I want to talk about today. Not test results. Not what your doctor says about your numbers. I want to talk about the things you do without thinking. The small, almost invisible things that tell the real truth about how you're doing at 70, 75, 80 years old. I've written some of this down. It's in my book, the Coleman Remedy book. Links in the description. But what I want to tell you today starts before the book. It starts with a page in my father's old notebook that I almost walked right past. If you're past 70 and you're still here, sit with me for a few minutes. I'd like to know if any of this sounds like your life. Leave it in the comments if it does. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there's a button for that on this screen. I'd be glad to have your company. The morning after Marcus left, I was out in the garden at 5:30 the way I always am. The sun wasn't up yet, just the pale gray of early morning and the smell of soil that's been turned and worked for 20 years. Damp and alive, a little sharp if you get your face close to it. I was carrying my tin cup of the herbal tonic I make every morning, the same one my father made. And I was thinking about what the boy had said, the handrail, and I started making a mental accounting, the way an engineer does, not to brag, just to understand the inventory. What can I actually still do? What I realized first was this. For most of my adult life, I had been measuring the wrong things entirely. When I was 60, 65, I thought health meant your numbers were good, blood work clean, blood pressure in range. The doctor shook your hand and said, "See you next year," without that particular look on his face, the one that means he's choosing his words carefully. I believed that was the whole story. Most of us do because it's what we're handed. A chart, a number, a range. Normal or abnormal. Pass or fail. You go in a worried man and come out either relieved or not. And either way, that appointment is the entirety of how you know where you stand with yourself. My father, Earl, never had a blood panel taken in his life, near as I can tell. He lived on a piece of hardscrabble land in Harlan County, Kentucky, and his health was measured in entirely different units. Could he still lift the fence post? Could he walk the back property line without stopping to rest? Could he get down on one knee to look at the base of a sick plant and stand back up again without making a sound? Those were his numbers. I didn't understand that until I was already old myself. What I understood for decades was the medical version, and I held on to it faithfully. I was a good patient in that sense, believed in the system the way men of my generation were taught to believe in institutions. When my cholesterol was high, I worried. When it came back normal, I relaxed. That was my whole relationship with my own body for 30 years, waiting for someone else to tell me how I was doing. The heart attack in 2009 shook some of that loose. But even afterward, after I got off the medications and started paying closer attention, I was still mostly focused on the clinical picture. Are the numbers moving in the right direction? I was thinking like a patient, not like a man, not the way my father thought. I don't say that with shame. Most of us are trained into it. The doctor is the expert. The patient receives the report. That's the contract. And for plenty of things, it's the right contract. But there are things that contract cannot measure, things your doctor will never think to ask about in a 12-minute appointment, things that matter more than your blood panels when you're 75 or 80 or 84 years old. Eleanor understood this. She spent 28 years as a nurse, and she saw it constantly. Patients with clean test results who could barely button their own shirts in the morning, and patients with borderline everything who were out in their yards, cooking their own meals, walking to the mailbox, remembering everybody's name without a written note. She used to say, and this was Eleanor, not me, she used to say that the numbers tell you what's wrong. They don't tell you what's right. I've thought about that sentence for years. I think she was on to something. The medical system has never quite been able to put a billing code on, so they don't talk about it much. About 6 months after Eleanor passed, I drove out to visit my neighbor Raymond. He's 78, lives about 4 miles from here. Sharp man, spent 40 years in accounting, knows more about the Civil War than most historians I've encountered. He told me his last checkup went fine. Cholesterol managed, heart in good shape, blood pressure within range. His doctor was pleased. Raymond was pleased. But when I got there, he didn't get up from his chair to meet me at the door. Joyce let me in and said he'd been having a harder time lately. Not sick exactly, just slower. Knees bothered him getting up, hands stiff in the mornings. He'd given up the garden because crouching down was too much. He was thinking about selling the house. Too much maintenance, and Joyce worried about the stairs. I sat with Raymond for a couple of hours. At one point, his phone rang from across the room, and he didn't get up for it, just let it ring. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. I drove home thinking about the gap. Raymond's numbers were fine. Raymond wasn't fine. And the distance between those two things was widening every month without any test catching it. I started paying closer attention after that, to myself mostly. And I noticed something that I think a lot of people notice but don't name, that the ones who age the best are not necessarily the ones with the most pristine medical records. They're the ones who kept doing things, small things, ordinary things that look like nothing from the outside. Getting up off the floor without using your hands, carrying groceries in one trip, reading a page of a book without needing to hunt for more light, walking into a room and remembering exactly why you came, making a meal from start to finish without losing the thread, sleeping through until morning, sitting on the actual ground in the garden and getting yourself back up, None of those appear on a blood test, but they are the true indicators, the ones that matter most when you are past 70. I spent a good while writing all of this down. It's in the Coleman Remedy book. There's a whole section on what I call the 9 quiet vitality markers, the things I believe every person past 70 should still be working to keep, the measurements that actually matter, and what I found helps hold on to them. The link is in the description. I wrote it because I wanted to get it right while the thinking was still clear. But what I want you to understand is this. Those 9 things are not a checklist. They're a portrait. They're the difference between being alive and being in the life. My father's notebook sits on this kitchen table where Eleanor and I had breakfast for 50 years. I read from it most mornings. The pages are worn at the edges, and the pencil has faded in places. But the writing is still his, careful, unhurried, the handwriting of a man who wrote slowly because he meant every word. And somewhere in those months after I'd been thinking about Raymond, I turned to a page near the back that I must have passed 100 times without stopping at. It was a list. No title, no date, just a column in his handwriting, pencil on lined paper. Walk to the creek, carry the wood, button a shirt, go up the cellar stairs, remember the names, stand up without holding on, open the truck door with the bad shoulder, sleep through until morning, sit on the ground and get back up. That was the whole page. No explanation, no commentary, just the list. I sat with it for a long time. I don't know exactly when my father wrote that. He died in 1989, 68 years old. The black lung took him the way it took so many men from those Kentucky mountains. But before that last year, Earl Coleman was capable in a way that had nothing to do with any doctor's chart. He could carry a 60-pound feed sack at 65, walked his property every morning until 6 months before he died. His memory was exact, could tell you the weather on any significant day going back 40 years. When I found that page, I understood something I'd been circling around for months without being able to say it plainly. My father wasn't proud of those things because they were exceptional. He was proud of them because they were ordinary. And the ordinary had become precious. I sat at this kitchen table, Eleanor's chair empty across from me, the way it's been since 2019. The morning light through that window, the same as it's always been. And I read the list again, and I matched it against myself, not competitively, just honestly. The way you take honest stock of something you're responsible for. Can I walk to somewhere that matters? Yes. Can I carry what I need to carry? Yes. Still bring the groceries in one trip? Still lift the garden soil bags in March? Can I button a shirt? Yes. The arthritis slows me on cold mornings, but yes. Can I go upstairs without holding on? Yes, as Marcus noticed. Can I remember the names? Yes. My children, my grandchildren, my neighbors, the plants in this garden, the authors on my shelves. Can I stand up from a chair without pushing off with both hands? Yes. Can I sleep through the night? Most nights. The chamomile tea helps. That's from the notebook too. Can I sit on the ground and get back up? Yes. I was down checking the rosemary 3 days ago. Got up slow, but I got up. 8 out of 9. The truck door shoulder has been the truck door shoulder since 1974. I've made my peace with it. I went through all 9, and I thought, that's the inventory. The real one, not the one in the doctor's filing cabinet. This one, the one that tells you whether you're still in your life. And then I thought about the people I know who couldn't honestly answer yes to most of these. Not because of one catastrophic event, but because they stopped trying, slowly, without noticing. The house had a rail, so they started using it every time. The store had a cart, so they stopped carrying the bags. Sitting on the ground was inconvenient, so they stopped, and then discovered one day they no longer could. Nobody told them to stop. They just stopped, and the body took them at their word. I'm not judging that. Getting older is hard. But I've come to believe, from watching my father, from watching Eleanor's patients, from watching Raymond let that phone ring, that there is a real difference between what time does to a person and what a person quietly allows. At 84, I don't have time for things that don't work. And these 9 things are worth protecting. Not forever, just as long as you honestly can. One morning at a time. I called Patricia that evening, my daughter down in Austin. She has Eleanor's way of listening. Lets you finish your thought before she says a word. I told her about the list, about Raymond, about Marcus and the porch steps. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Daddy, you should make a video about that." I thought on it for a day or two, and I realized the reason I was hesitating was that it felt too simple, not dramatic enough. Just an old man at a kitchen table talking about a list his father wrote on notebook paper 40 years ago. But that's exactly why it needed saying. We spend so much energy in this country managing the fears of old age, the diagnoses, the medications, the what-ifs, the conversations with careful doctors who can only tell you what's failing, that we forget to take stock of what's still working. We become auditors of our own decline. We look so hard for what's wrong that we stop noticing what isn't. My father never did that. Not because he was naive, he wasn't. He watched friends die young from the mining, knew what the end of a man looked like. But he kept his list, the things he could still do. Not as a denial of what was happening to him, just as an honest accounting, just as a way of knowing where he stood on any given morning. I think that's the practice. That's what I'd call the actual remedy, if I had to give it a name. Every morning when I walk out to this garden, still dark, the rosemary smelling the way it always has, my boots leaving tracks in the dew, I'm doing my accounting. Not the numbers the doctor wants, my numbers, Earl's numbers. The 9 things that tell me whether I'm still in the life or only passing through it. I've written it all down. Everything my father knew. Everything Eleanor taught me in 28 years of nursing. Everything I've worked out on my own since the doctors finished with me. and I went looking for something that actually held up. I called it the Coleman Remedy Book. It's not a medical textbook. I'm not a doctor and never pretended to be. But the section on these 9 quiet vitality markers is the one I wrote last, and the one I'm most glad exists. It's the closest thing I know to the letter my father left me on that page. And I want to pass it along the same way, not as a prescription, just as company. The link is in the description. Read it the way you'd read something left for you by someone who was paying attention for a long time. Marcus came back last month. We walked out to the garden early, the same as we did in August. This time he went up the porch steps first. Didn't glance at the rail, didn't think about it. Just walked up with his mind somewhere far ahead of him. The way you do when you're 17 and the whole world is still out in front. I don't know if he was thinking about our conversation. Probably not. But I was. Because that's the whole thing right there. The things you do without thinking are the things still working. The day you have to start thinking about them, that's the day to start paying attention. My daddy used to say, the most expensive cure is the one somebody sells you. Think about that.